So today I'm hosting Jinghan Zeng to talk about China's use and export of digital surveillance technologies, the advantages and disadvantages of these technologies, whether their import presents a threat to democracies of importing countries, and to what extent their use serves the purpose of Chinese global expansion.
Jinghan Zeng is Professor of China and International Studies at Lancaster University in the UK. He is also the Academic Director of China Engagement and Director of Lancaster University Confucius Institute. Before his academic career, Jinghan worked at the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. His main research lies in the field of politics and international relations, with current focus on China's Belt and Road Initiative and artificial intelligence strategy. He is a prolific author as well, having his latest book on artificial intelligence published last year. Jinghan has also published over 20 articles in leading journals of politics, international relations and area studies, including the Pacific Review, Journal of Contemporary China, International Affairs, and many more.
So, Mr. Zeng, China is the largest user of CCTV cameras and other digital surveillance technologies. In 2019, it was estimated that there are 200 million cameras in China, and that in a few years that number will triple. Also, China has the ambition to become a cyber superpower and a leader in artificial intelligence by 2030. So, what are the reasons for such rapid growth in digital surveillance and China's heavy reliance on it?
Well, I think there are several factors of it. First of all, the fundings previously are not available. I think with the growth of Chinese economy, obviously, I think all departments and all sectors, they have more fundings to play with. So the fundings previously were not available, now are available. And also technology previously are not available and now become more available. And then the scheme become a lot more economic than before. I think all those are the reasons. And also, I think there is a strong view that China need to, at least in the government, think that it's important to further strengthen public security and social management. And in order to manage China, and it's often been perceived that China is a large country, most populous country, and a lot of people there, and it's important really to enhance public security and to provide better social management by using modern ways, which is a modern technology, to deliver that. I think all those reasons are the key drivers of this growth.
But from the example of the use of this technology, one gets the impression that it is successful in reducing misdemeanors and petty crime. For example, I don't know, crossing the pedestrian crossing on red light, irregular loan payments. But that large and organized crime, especially political corruption, remains out of control of these systems. So do the benefits of using this technology justify such an intrusion into the privacy and freedom of citizens?
Well, I think it depends on how you look at it. We're not going to expect technology to solve everything, right? For example, the corruption issue you mentioned about, I think it's not completely worthless. I think in a way, I think when the technology look into, for example, the bank transfer and things like that, it will potentially be helpful. But we shouldn't be expecting that with this new technology, it's going to solve all the issues we have in human society. I think that wouldn't be really fair. But I think you're right to say that it was helpful to solve some of the issues. And some of the probably other examples you haven't mentioned has often been frequently talked about in China is for example, trafficking or child trafficking, those kind of issues. And ordinary Chinese people do feel a lot more safe. I think with those cameras, with those technology, when there is a disputes, they can always say, let's go to the camera, let's find things like that. And so to answer your question, I would argue many ordinary Chinese people are positive to this development. You don't really see the kind of fear about this technological development, or the kind of strong sentiment about its development in the West. But having said that, China is a very diverse society. People have different views. For those who are liberal in China, the Chinese liberals, they will think that the rapid development of those technology is an invasion of their freedom and an invasion of their privacy. There are some examples about, for example, a law professor in China has been confronting the residential guards over using facial recognition technology to enter their own flat buildings. So you do have examples of that, and people perceiving this differently. But I would say most people are very positive to the technological development. I think another thing I just want to add on here is this needs to be looked into beyond the surveillance technology per se. Otherwise, it can be misleading. Generally speaking, you can say that the issue of privacy and freedom is a wider issue beyond the surveillance technology per se. For example, if you use WeChat, use Alibaba or other a lot of apps, it will collect lots of people's information, and that will be potentially a problem for privacy, which has now been noticed. So some Chinese people are joking at calling it naked wrong, means that the technological development goes far ahead, and then law and regulation are behind. Only very recently, the state started to put on data security law, for example, things like that, trying to regulate this. So in the wider picture, that kind of negative impact on China's privacy and freedom is not, I think, not only because of surveillance technology. It's a wider issue of this technological development goes too rapidly, too far, than that. And then the law and regulation were behind.
So, can I ask you, in addition to autocratic states and hybrid regimes, democratic states also use digital technologies to monitor citizens. Is there a difference between autocratic and democratic regimes in the way they use these technologies? For example, I don't know, China and some Western countries.
I think this is still a debatable topic in academia. Obviously, people have different views in it. And a lot of issues that you say, for example, in the United States, and in Black Lives Matters, for example, or ethnic minority issue, things like that, then some people will argue there is no difference there, the way you are using it. But from a law perspective, you can say probably in democratic societies, there is a lot more regulation and on the state actor and on the way the state actor behaves than that in other types of regimes. But I think that's a wider issue about state-society relation, and it's again it's not only applies in the case of digital technology. It's a wider political context shapes the way digital technology has been used.
Yes, of course. And how does China influence other democratic states, for example, to participate in its digital, some would say, dystopia? For example, providing data for its social credit ranking system. To what extent is that successful? And perhaps could you first explain to our listeners what is the social credit ranking system?
Right. The social credit system develops from kind of US or probably in other countries a financial kind of system to evaluate your credibility, your previously used, for example, access citizens the ability to, for example, borrow a mortgage, affordability of the mortgage, and that will, or probably about insurance things. So it provides more comprehensive kind of evaluation of you as a citizens, your financial sustainability, your financial kind of situation. However, there was some discussion about moving forward on this to have a little bit more comprehensive beyond the financial part of it. There are a lot of analysis about those social credit system in academic literature and in media discussions. But I think they goes too far, which has been getting far away from the reliability. So first of all, the development of China's social credit system has become very fragmented. So different kind of Chinese provinces have their own kind of data. They are not necessarily shared as one. So if you might have a social credit in one province and then a different in the other one. So the kind of ways that the bigger brother is watching you and control everything of you is far away from reliability at this stage, and is still piloting about this project. It's not as powerful as many kind of media is focusing on and is doing. And also, it's not a new thing in China as well. Back in 3-4 decades ago, I think every Chinese have what we call individual archivals. That's a system borrowed from Soviet Union, in which everyone have an envelope that includes your performance in your primary school, middle school, things like that. So this social credit system is just digitalization of that. It's not something fundamentally new, brings in and changing people's life, and still piloting. And where it might go, we don't really know. And one point I want to add on here is, it is not being viewed as a way that Western society would view it. Many Chinese people are positive to it because it's a society lack of social trust. And then many people feel that having a social credit system in which we got one system that is able to show your financial rating, this will be a lot more helpful for you to do business, and then for them have kind of a reference to know about to what extent this person can be trusted or this business can be trusted, so that we can work on it. And it significantly reduce the social cost of individual referencing, individual checking, or due diligence. So in those kind of regards, I think it has been perceived quite positively by many Chinese people.
Interesting. China is a major exporter of digital surveillance technology, that we know. But to what extent, in what way is China using it as a foreign policy instrument? And maybe which countries does China have the most developed cooperation with in this regard?
I think mostly frequently discussed in international media or of those countries cooperate with China will be Iran, for example, Russia, for example, because they have similar kind of laws and political values, and it's easier to start with. So, however, I want to emphasize on one thing. When we talk about this issue, it's often been perceived that this is a state agenda driven by the Chinese government with a specific purpose. But what is really behind the scenes is all of those are business, which is driven by capital, by profit. It's suppose that a Chinese company will have this technology and they want to make a profit, as simple as that. And then happens to be those countries, Iran and Russia, kind of buyers. They come say, we want that, and I can sell it to you. And if it's American buyer, if it's British buyer, or regardlessly of the type of country you come from, Western liberal democratic or non-Western liberal democratic, they will be happy to do business with you. We are happy to sell you this technology. So I think it's less about a big, broad state agenda trying to sell those surveillance technology and then export China's political model. It's more about a business world, and Chinese company and many are private, have those kind of technology, just want to find a market and want to sell those technology. And it's more driven by the business profit and corporate interests, rather than a bigger geopolitical picture led by the central government of China.
So you would say that the principal aim of this exportation is not really to transform the policies and societies of the countries that are importing this technology?
I wouldn't say that's a key driver of why those are doing it. I would say the key driver here is, again, it's a market. It's a market. It's capitalism. That's the key thing driving it. But I'm not. But if you want to add everything together, I'm not denying that it might have a geopolitical implication. But that geopolitical implication might not necessarily be pre-designed. So the key driver of it is still business profit.
Right. So maybe to zoom in on our local circumstances here. So within the Safe City project, model on projects from China, Serbia has installed thousands of cameras in Belgrade by Huawei. In your opinion, what can the citizens of Serbia expect if and actually when this concept comes to life, taking into consideration Serbia's autocratic tendencies?
Well, I will be probably less panic than what has been described in many international media stories, right? And if you go back, think about it. Now we got this camera by Huawei. How is this different from, let's say, we got this camera being there by an American company, or by a British company, or by a German company? What is the fundamental difference of that, right? Cameras are cameras. It can be Chinese camera, Russia camera, American camera, or German camera, French camera. It's all camera being there. I think what really matters is who use it, who have access to it, and what for. And what for is not decided by the company who sell you the camera, right? It's by the government. So ultimately, it's a government thing. And then I think one of the arguments going to say is what make it very different of Huawei is the China side, or the Chinese government might be able to have access to it. Then I think that's another technological kind of discussion. To what extent Huawei do have backdoor, I think it's a technological issue. But then again, imagining if it's camera by American companies, is there any guarantee that, American government will not go into the back door? Or I think those are up to the air for discussion and debatable, right? Is the U.S. Government, when it comes to surveillance, intelligence, is the U.S. government behaving fundamentally different from the Chinese government because they are Western liberal democracy? Well, I think it's up to everybody's own views. But I think the themes here is camera, right? Camera have its own purpose. I think it matters less whether it's a camera by China, from China, or camera from the US or from another country.
Many would disagree with that, but concretely in relation to that, in September 2020, a Trump administration sponsored agreement between Serbia and Kosovo, which had amongst its provisions and obligations for both sides to remove 5G equipment from, and here I quote, untrusted vendors from their mobile networks, and to prohibit such vendors from bidding in the future. Officials from Serbia and Kosovo said that this was a clear reference to Chinese companies such as Huawei Technologies. So to what extent is China's export of technologies part of the global fight for dominance with the US? And I think also very interestingly, who do you think will prevail in this fight?
I think this question needs to be understood in a wider context. I think it's less about surveillance technology and more about technological supremacy. It's about technological leadership. Basically, is US or China who is going to be the next technological superpower, right? And then if you put in that framework, it's less about technological competition. It's more about the structural competition between China and the United States. And technological competition is only one part of it. Your competition, economic competition, political competition, potentially in a way military competition, right? So this technological competition is a part of that. It's US, China who is fighting to be the next leading superpower, right? I think that's a wider context to understand this question. And regarding the specific example you mentioned, the view I see it's more about supply chain, about who have the control and the monopoly of this global technology. And what the US has been trying to do is to say in the 5G area, I think from a Chinese perspective, for example, Chinese government has made it very clear, this is not about competition, this is all about protectionism, right? When you find that your company cannot compete with the Chinese one, then you will find ways outside of the market, outside of the competition, to destroy or to defeat the Chinese company. And then claiming the national security or using those kind of political ways is a way to achieve that. That's what many in China would say. So this example, from a Chinese perspective, they will see that American companies simply cannot compete with the Chinese one. They know technological-wise, economic-wise, they are not competitive. So they will have to find other ways to deal with it. And this is a politicalization of technology, claiming this is unsafe, claiming this is not trustworthy, and then in order to defeat the Chinese companies. So that's what they would say this issue. And who will win this competition? I think it's very difficult to say. I would argue that the US still got considerable technological advancement than China do. Some Chinese companies do have some advantage in some area, but generally speaking, the US is still the global leader in technology, and that's being widely acknowledged in China. China is far behind on many fronts, on many things, and China have a lot to catch up about.
Maybe the last question. China, through the export of digital technology, offers other countries a model for accelerated development while preserving their independence. That is, offers an alternative to the development model of Western democracies. Having in mind the authoritarian risk, how can democracies that are importing this technology respond to this global challenge of China?
I think probably I look at from a different angle than challenge, right? So if we really look into those exportation of technology, as I mentioned, it's more of by corporate kind of interest, corporate driven. So aggregate, accumulate everything together, I do not think that is an attempt to export China's political model. It's just a technology driven by corporate interests. However, this do, I think, in a way, provide kind of some sort of challenge for other countries, especially when they have a different kind of political values. But then the question here is generally not only in the area of technology, but outside of technological area, is how Western society should respond to the rise of China, generally speaking. But it's not only China, but also the rise of non-Western country like India, like Brazil, all right, previously talk about BRICS countries. I think that is a wider picture to answer this question. And my view is that I think Chinese people, like all people, like Indian people, like people from South Africa, they all are entitled to their development rights, like everyone in the West. They're entitled to a good and high living standard, as people do in the US, in Britain, and in Europe. So in those ways that from a moral perspective, there is nothing wrong for China to grow its economy and then to develop, to improve its living standard, to give a better life to its own people. But altogether, what we have really been seeing globally is you got the relatively decline of the West and the rise of China and then other countries like India, for example, because their economy grow bigger and bigger. And this is going to create change and challenge for the declining power to deal with, right? And then how you position yourself in that context. And especially when a lot of countries, their economy are not growing. For example, in the UK, the British economy is not really like kind of rapid developing economy. Then how are you going to deal with that? And how this is going to, I think, for all those questions, I think that to be think about all together, rather than be thinking about this is all created by China or the China's growth is a challenge. I think it's an issue of we are now living in a different world. In a world that you have seen the relative decline of the West, the rise of non-Western countries, then how the Western society should position themselves in this picture and to deal with their own problems.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zeng, for this really interesting conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.